We're really excited to have Dawn Richards talk to us about engaging patients in a meaningful, to create meaningful and feasible studies. I just want to tell you a little bit about Research Ready because I think we have some people from across the country who may not have heard of this platform before. This is a program that we've developed for research personnel, so research coordinators, managers, new investigators, and the intent is to create a space where we can share best practices and highlight exceptional processes. And as part of this platform, we also have a community of practice. So following this presentation, we are going to open up questions and answers for the next week on the virtual base camp. Where Dawn will be fielding any further questions that come out of today's presentation, but make sure you sign up for that. And you can do that by visiting CTO's website and looking up Research Ready and just request to join that community. So we're very excited to have Dawn Richards join us today. I have the pleasure of working with her at CTO. And I'll tell you a little bit about her for those of you who are not as familiar. Dawn Richards is the founder of 502 Labs and is the director of the Patient and Public Engagement at Clinical Trials Ontario. She has a PhD in analytical chemistry from the University of Alberta and experience in a variety of roles during the past 15 years. It was her diagnosis with rheumatoid arthritis 10 years ago that instigated a journey to combine her passion for science with making the most of her diagnosis. In her role at CTO, Dawn is charged with executing on CTO's strategic pillar of patient and public engagement. As a patient advocate and volunteer, Dawn is the Vice President of the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance and a research ambassador for the Institute of Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis, a member of the BMJ's Patient Panel Reviewers, and was the first patient advisor of the Canadian Medical Association's Wait Time Alliance. She advocates for arthritis awareness, access to treatment, and the inclusion of patients in decision-making and as research collaborators, as well as the importance of research. So we're very pleased to have Dawn share this with us today. I always learn something from Dawn when we are working together, so very excited to have her share her expertise here. I am recording this training, so you can choose if you want to be on video or not. We make this accessible beyond the live session, so just to make sure you're aware of that. And we're going to have question and answer period at the end of this, and we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes. So hold your questions, or you can add them to the chat if you'd like while the presentation's ongoing, and we'll adjust them when we're done that. So Dawn, I'm going to pass this over to you.
Okay, thanks, Linnea.
Welcome.
I think unfortunately I have to adjust my bio. Everything's about +5 years on there. So I wish it was still 5 years ago, but it's not. But thanks for that introduction, Linnea. And quite honestly, I'm happy to see so many people on the call that I know and haven't seen in a while. So thanks for brightening my day already as we get started. I know lots of you know me from Twitter, so maybe can I just make sure people are on mute? Okay, thanks. My Twitter handle is at the bottom, so you know this is going to be recorded and shared, and feel free to tweet as we go. So as Linnea mentioned, I'm going to do a bit of talking and walk you through some resources, and I'm going to keep lots of time at the end for questions. So here's our agenda. I know some of you might not be that familiar with Clinical Trials Ontario and what we're up to in patient and public engagement, so I'm going to share that with you. I want to get everyone kind of on the same foundational place when we start to talk about patient engagement. Hopefully I don't have to convince you too badly about why you should consider patient engagement, but I'm going to pull that out. The bulk of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about resources that can help you with this. And I know there's a few patients on the call, so I'm pleased that the resources that I'm going to share with you, patient partners can also use. And we're going to talk a little bit about virtual patient engagement. Given that we're living through a pandemic, we're going to talk a bit about that. So I think people often think that we have to do everything face-to-face, and our current times are sharing with us that isn't always the case. And I'd argue for some patient partners, it's actually more convenient to work virtually for some time. Like I said, we'll take questions at the end. So today's meeting objectives, again, I hope I don't have to twist your arm too hard about how working with people who live with conditions and who have different healthcare experiences can bring some really needed and interesting perspectives to your work. The bulk of it, I want to really help you to be able to find practical guidance on how you can do this in your work and where you can find resources. And we've done a lot of work at CTO in the past few years to develop some of these resources, and I'm super excited to share them with you today. And then we're just going to talk generally about how you can start to do patient engagement within your work. And I honestly don't want you to get too freaked out. There's a lot of information I'm going to share with you, and it's just meant to be a baseline starting point. And, you know, it's something that you can for sure work through and take on at your own pace. I also want to give you a hypothetical task. For those of you who do work in research and in clinical trials, I want you to consider a project you're working on right now. So I don't want to give you, you know, an imaginary task, but I want you to think about a concrete task that you already have on the go or that you're planning to launch. And I want you to consider if your supervisor asked you to either bring patient partners into that project or, for example, create a patient advisory group. The questions I want to ask you are, at this point in the conversation, do you feel like this is a task you could take on? And do you feel you would know where to go to get resources? I think we've got a poll. Linnea, are you able to bring up the poll for us? There we go. So if you could just take a minute to answer these questions, it would be really helpful for me to gauge where you are at the start. And then we're going to come back to this at the end of the session, and hopefully your answers will have changed a little bit. So I see it's ridiculous how exciting these polls make you feel when you're giving these kinds of presentations. People are actually listening, and I'm learning from you as we go. So this is great. So it seems like we've got about just over 2/3 of people responding. So it's kind of split. Some of you feel like you could take the task on, which is great, and I hope I can help you learn some new things. And a number of you feel like you're maybe not quite there. And it seems like it's the same for the second question, that many of you feel like you know where you could go to get some resources, and probably about 2/3 of you feel like you're not quite knowing where to go. So again, thanks a lot for responding to that, and we'll walk through things, and hopefully your answers will change as we go along. So I'm just going to note what we had there and before we move on. So thanks, Linnea, for the poll. So just briefly, Clinical Trials Ontario, for those of you who aren't as familiar with it, we are primarily funded by the Government of Ontario, and we have 3 strategic pillars. One is to streamline the processes to support high quality clinical trials. And so we've got a streamlined ethics review process, and we've got a number of other resources under the STREAM pillar. What I'm going to talk to you about today is underneath the Engage pillar. And then we've also got the Promote pillar. So promoting Ontario as a competitive place to do clinical trials. So within the Engage pillar, which I'm tasked with leading at Clinical Trials Ontario, it's really our goal to support and promote public and patient engagement with clinical trials. I emphasize with there because that's a really purposeful choice of words. So sometimes we are providing materials to help people make a decision about being in a clinical trial or not as a participant. And in some cases, like what we're going to talk about today, we have been involved in developing resources to support patient partnership on clinical trial teams. So WIP can mean different things, and really it's our goal to engage patients and the public in different ways around clinical trials. And we've also done some work to support healthcare providers. They're an important part of the engagement pillar as well. So again, just briefly, this is a snapshot of the homepage of our website, and everything that is developed for patients and the public, you'll see under this drop-down menu. And it's got everything there to support engagement with clinical trials. So it's got a learn more about clinical trials section. So that's to support people who are considering participation in studies. And we've developed that with patients, and they've told us, you know what, based on where I am in my decision-making process, I might have questions that are different from someone who's already in a clinical trial. And so we've developed that with their insight and guidance. We've got a clinical trial finder, and although we're based in Ontario, people can look for a clinical trial in any province or territory across the country, as well as look for a trial in all of Canada. We've got some what's called Talk Clinical Trials campaign, which is supported by our efforts on social media and our blog post there. A lot of what I'm going to be talking today about is under the resources for engaging patients. And then we've got what we call our College of Lived Experience. I'm going to talk about the college a little bit later, but at a high level, there are people from across Ontario who either live with various conditions or their loved ones do, and they have an interest in clinical trials as well as health and healthcare. Oops. And then we do a lot of work with patient organizations and health charities, and so we talk about that as well. The resources for engaging patients as partners in clinical trials, you can also find under our resources for industry and institutions too. So there's a few ways to find things. Okay, so I just want to make sure that we're kind of all on the same foundation when we start talking about patient engagement and health research. So first of all, we've seen like this real shift in the past 20 years or so, where funding agencies are actually requiring that patient partners be involved in research. And so these are kind of the big agencies or organizations that you'll often see their names associated with patient engagement, or sometimes called patient and public involvement in research. So in the UK, the group there is called Involved. They are kind of the granddaddy on the block. They've been around for over 20 years, supporting what they call patient and public involvement in research. In the US, there is an organization called PCORI, and that stands for the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. They have been around since, I think it's around 2006 or 2007, and they're mandated by Congress in the US to support and fund research that includes patients. And then in Canada, we have the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research that is supported by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And that's kind of the baby on the block. So that's been around for about 10 years now. So just to give you some context that these are some of the major organizations that you'll see globally that support and encourage patient engagement on research teams. Again, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, this definition of patient here comes from CIHR, and they use a fairly broad definition of patient. For CIHR's definition, that includes not only people who are living with a health condition or who are experiencing a health issue, but that also includes kind of their circle of caregivers and family and friends as well. So, patients bring important experiences and perspectives to the table. So do the people that they interact with and live with closely. They bring different perspectives from a caregiver perspective. So important to keep that in mind. And CIHR also has these 4 guiding principles that are related to patient engagement and research. I'm just going to spend a minute to go over each of those because I think they're important. When you go back as we go through the webinar and you think about your specific project at work in which you might engage patient partners, I'd ask you to consider thinking about these guiding principles and how you'd implement them. So first of all, there's this idea of inclusiveness. And here the concept is that you want to create a team atmosphere where you can create a safe place for patients to talk about really vulnerable things in their lives. So don't forget that while you might work in the research space and you might be studying a particular condition, you may live with that condition, but chances are you don't. And for an individual who lives with that condition and talks about some of their personal experiences, that can be very vulnerable, and it's also very, very personal to talk about those experiences. The second guiding principle is support. And so here the idea is within your team, have you, allowed for it to be a safe place? Are you creating a safe place where everyone can share their perspectives and input? Is there a need for there to be cultural competence given who you're working with? And is there a need for training and education for the team? Not just for the patient partners, but also for the researchers and other individuals who are on the team. And I think today some of the things that I'll show you hopefully can help your efforts in the support guiding principle. The third guiding principle is this concept of mutual respect. And believe me, when you look at all these, they feel fairly simple and it feels like, yeah, that makes sense, right? But one thing I want to ask you about mutual respect, and one thing I always do when I engage patient partners with teams that include, physicians and researchers, I encourage everyone to check their credentials and their titles at the door. So talk to each other as individuals with first names only, and you'll be really surprised at how much that levels the playing field and how much the power dynamics, even though they're generally not intended, go out the window. And so this is really about acknowledging that while some individuals on the team bring that real scientific and medical expertise, the patient's experiential knowledge about living with their health condition or their disease day to day is equally as important to that. And one thing I always like to share here is, I live with rheumatoid arthritis day in and day out. So I have learned to adapt. I've learned to deal with things. And while, for example, my rheumatologist has gone to school for many years, provides amazing care, and understands the ins and outs of the medical side of my RA, she doesn't live with RA. And so she just brings a different but really complementary experience to my lived experience. So I want you to think about that in the team in your mind that you're creating. The last guiding principle here is co-build, and the idea is to work together as partners, hopefully from the start of a project. That's kind of the gold standard, and I realize that can't always happen, and so I'd encourage you that even if you've got a project that's ongoing, if there are creative ways that you can find to bring patient partners and their perspectives, I'd encourage you to do so. So why should you consider this approach? Well, I think I kind of touched on that a bit, that scientific and medical experts bring one type of knowledge about a disease, and then people who are their patients or caregivers or family members, they live day in and day out with these conditions, and they bring a really different perspective. And so I like to think that these two perspectives can really be complementary to each other and hopefully develop a stronger team and more interesting research questions than maybe you would without both sides of that equation. Okay, so again, why do we even consider this approach? So I'm going to reference a paper here, and I'm happy to share this after. It is open access, so you can always take a screenshot and check it out. This is a paper that was written by Ken Getz, who's well known in the clinical research arena, and others. Ken is at Tufts University in Boston, and he does a lot of work around patient engagement and clinical research. He also does some really interesting work, which I'm going to show you, in terms of the actual return on investment of patient engagement within clinical research. So, you know, they argue in this paper, besides the moral and ethical duties of including patients as research partners, there are anecdotes and there are actually evidence at this point to show that we can improve the relevance of study questions by including a diversity on the research team. We can help set more appropriate endpoints for studies by including patient partners in the team. We can definitely improve the participant experience by having those different perspectives on the team to help brainstorm creative ways that we can decrease barriers to participation, which is the next bullet point, as well as understand, you know, of the things we want to measure, what's really valued and needed, and are there different ways that we can measure it. And lastly, patients, you know, have lots of networks, and they understand, for example, about best ways to potentially reach other individuals like themselves. I'm not really a big fan of the word adherence. I don't think a lot of patients are, but it is an important concept within clinical studies to make sure that people are following the protocol as required. And I think patients have a way of communicating with other patients about why that's important and how it's ultimately going to benefit them. And same with remaining in the study. And this isn't, you know, intended to keep people in the study who don't want to be, but overall helping with people understanding the responsibilities associated with participating in a study and potentially even asking the right questions about things. So this is what this group argues are reasons that you should consider this approach. I think importantly for a number of people who do clinical research, I often see the attitude that engaging patients is a nice to have, but sometimes it's really difficult given all of the other demands that you have on your plate. So sometimes money helps as a motivator, and this group showed that there is an actual return on investment for engaging patient partners in your work. So what they did was they did a study, a hypothetical study, where they took a typical oncology development program, so a small molecule that was entering either phase 2 or phase 3 studies, and patients would be engaged prior to entering phase 2 or phase 3 studies. They measured what's called expected net present value, and I have to reference my notes here because I'm not a business person. But basically, what the expected net present value is it's a way to build in success and failures into the net present value, which is really a revenue stream that comes along with development. It's after tax, it's inflation adjusted, and it basically, the net present value is a net cash flow, assuming the success of the development process and regulatory approval through the process as well. So it integrates cost, time, revenue, and risk. And in this case, in this hypothetical project, they took an investment in patient engagement of $100,000. And I want you to pick yourself up off your chair because I know that likely many of you look at that number and that's a huge number. But I do want you to consider that they're doing this from a global perspective. And with that, they have integrated, for example, that there would be some in-person meetings of the patient partners and team. They're coming from all over the globe, and they would do a number of day-long sessions. So you know, you factor in some travel and you factor in probably a consulting agency, et cetera, that number gets to 100,000 fairly quickly. Again, I don't want this to scare you off because that's certainly not the kind of numbers you need to do meaningful patient engagement. It's just the hypothetical for this particular project. So that's setting up the project and what they're going to measure. When they looked at the results of this, they looked at assuming for the pre-phase 2 project that including patient partners would avoid at least one protocol amendment that would have to go to various research ethics board, and including patients in the study team would improve enrollment, which means you would start the study faster, improve adherence, so and retain people in the study. So they crunched the numbers and they found out that if these are the assumptions that were made, this would mean for a pre-phase 2 study, there would be an increase in net present value of over $62 million. And on the expected net present value, it would be $35 million. And then for the pre-phase 3 project, the numbers are in the brackets as well. The bottom line is that the numbers based on the investment in patient engagement exceed a 500-fold in the investment. So for this particular hypothetical study, there is a massive return on investment in terms of engaging patient partners with the study team. They also then made this equivalent to years and how much faster a product launch would be. So by avoiding protocol amendments, by ensuring enrollment goes fairly quickly, and there's a better adherence to the protocol as well as retention, it could save at least 2.5 years for pre-phase 2 product and at least 1.5 years in pre-phase 3, which we know equates to substantial savings. And quite frankly, for patients who are potentially waiting for this type of therapy, 2.5 years or 1.5 years is a really big deal. So that's kind of setting the stage for you in terms of why you might consider doing this. The next thing I want to do is spend a bit of time on the resources that we have developed to help people out here. So, I've kind of set the stage about why you should consider this, and hopefully you're thinking in the back of your mind about the project that you're working on at work and how you might engage patients with that. And now I'm going to walk you through some resources that we've developed and that are on our website that can certainly help you to engage patients in what you do. Again, as I mentioned at the start, these are all in our patients and public section of our website under resources for engaging patients. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of those things. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen for 1 minute here. And the first thing I'm going to talk about are some decision aids that we've created to help you gauge your readiness for engaging patient partners with your work, as well as to provide a number of resources for you. So you may already feel like you're ready, and that's awesome. And I'm going to share some of the resources in the decision aids for you. If you're a little less feeling like you're that ready, you might want to walk through the decision aids, which will really help you see where you are in your readiness part of the journey, and will also help you walk through different resources. So just briefly, these decision aids have been developed with help from CIHR SPORE, as well as from the Ontario SPORE Support Unit. It's been developed by a team of researchers, clinicians, some of us from Clinical Trials Ontario, as well as patient partners. And we've developed a patient decision aid, which you'll see on the left, as well as an investigator decision aid. They really parallel each other in terms of how they help you walk through if you're ready to work with a research team or with a patient partner. And ultimately, they help you make a decision about that and provide lots of resources to you. So I'm going to focus on the investigator decision aid, but for those of you who represent patients, you know, feel free to go in and check out the patient decision aid as well. Okay, so this is the website, and I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment and pull it up for you. Okay, so here we go. And we're going to go into resources for engaging patients. We're going to go into decision aids. And we're going to go into the one that's been developed for researchers and investigators. So this is what the decision aid looks like. For those of you who are familiar with decision aids, they are typically used in healthcare to help both patients and physicians make decisions about a treatment option. And so here the twist on them is that you're making a decision to see if you're ready, in this case, to work with patient partners or not. So, and again, the steps generally mimic a healthcare decision aid, except that it's for research. So the first section is really an introduction. And each of these has been set up where there's a bit of a preamble about what the section is. And then there are some structured FAQs and some responses. So you'll note that some of the FAQs in the introduction are some of the things that I talked to you about a little bit earlier in the presentation. So who are patients and what is patient engagement? There are some testimonials from patient partners and from investigators. There are both perceived benefits and perceived risks. And so this lays out some of them for you. And there's also something about the levels of engagement. And some of you might be familiar with this International Association for Public Participation spectrum, which ranges all the way from inform to empower. And that's really indicative of, are you going to engage patients and just tell them what you're up to, all the way to, are your patient partners going to be making decisions on the team? So I'm not going to spend too much time going through this, but this is all available for you to go through at your own leisure. The second part of the decision aid, again, both for patient partners and investigators, asks you to think about your priorities for engaging patient partners. And in this case, we've set up the priorities so that you think of them kind of in terms of how the research cycle happens. So it might start with identifying and prioritizing the research question. It might be in designing the protocol. It might be, in the case of academics, developing a grant proposal. It might be preparing to execute the study. And so in this particular section, you're asked to rank your priorities of where you would see engaging patient partners. And after you've done that, you would be asked to go on to the levels of engagement and then consider at what level you would engage people. So would it be at the inform level that we just talked about? Would you have them making the decisions themselves? So again, I'm not going to go through this in too much detail. You're more than welcome to work through this decision aid if you like. My goal here is to show you that it exists and to especially show you the different tools and resources that are part of the Learn More section of it. And within the Learn More section, again, we've laid this out according to the research process and how the research process works. And under the different sections of the research process, there will be different resources and different questions for you here. So for example, in terms of identifying and prioritizing the research questions itself, we've got information about the general principles for engaging patients as partners. And these are these 4 principles that I went through with you again earlier in the webinar. You might ask, well, like, how could I even engage patient partners in these different parts of the research process? And we've got that laid out for you here in case you're not sure about how to do that. I'm going to talk about this a little later too, but like how would I even find a patient partner? So we've got some resources there. And if you're interested in evaluating how you've engaged patient partners, we've got some good tools for you here that are available as well. One group of them has been created by patient partners themselves. And so you can use that at different points in your research project to ask them questions about how you've engaged them and what they've thought about that. And there are some other surveys as well that are here. A couple of things that we get asked about a lot, and so I'm going to skip to those particular sections. So you can see as I scroll through the research process, you'll get different questions that pop up. One thing we get asked about a lot is budgeting for patient partner reimbursement and compensation. And so again, in this section, reimbursement is allowing people to participate in either, paying for their travel, paying for part of their internet, etc. Compensation is actually providing them with compensation for their expertise and time. A lot of people struggle with this one, and so we've got even some information here for you that comes from the literature about rates that you might offer, and also some different resources that you can check into at the end here. So again, as you click through the different parts of the research process, different information will come up, and you can click on these and see what kind of advice we have, as well as what kind of other resources there might be there. So there's a whole section on communication as well to help you out. The rest of the decision aid is really about helping you make a decision and your readiness. So like I've talked about before. And again, if you go through the decision aid from start to end, in the My Readiness section, you'll come back to review your priorities. You'll come back to, after you've learned some more, are those really the levels of engagement that you envision for each of those? And then you'll take a quiz and you'll make a decision at the very end. So totally up to you if you use this in terms of really, gauging if you feel like you're ready, or if you need to learn more about engaging patient partners, or if you're just interested in some of the resources that are especially under the introduction and the learn more tabs. So I'll leave that up to you. And I just really wanted to share some of those pieces. And I'm going to go back to my slides here so that I can walk you through another tool that hopefully is also super practical and helps you think about the project at your own work in which you might consider engaging patient partners. So this tool is called the Patient Engagement Quality Guidance. This is basically a workbook that has been created by what's called the Patient Focused Medicines Development Initiative, of which CTO is a part of. It represents numerous participants across the globe, from for-profit organizations, not-for-profit organizations, from regulators, from health technology assessment groups. And the common goal here really is to help develop resources and ways that we can engage patient partners in medicine's development. So the Patient Engagement Quality Guidance is linked to, again, from our resources for engaging patient partners. And it's a workbook that you actually download. And this is what it looks like when you print it out. And there we go. Okay, so I'm so sorry, everyone. So thanks for your patience here. Basically, the workbook is set up as having 7 patient engagement quality criteria. And this, as I mentioned, is something that's been created with all stakeholders from medicine's development. And it's been based on pre-existing patient engagement frameworks and input from around the world. And there are these 7 patient engagement quality criteria which are listed here. I'm just going to quickly in the next few slides walk you through what to expect in each of those. So the first one is shared purpose. And for each page of the workbook, essentially it guides you through a few questions related to each of these. And then it asks you to write down some answers too in terms of how you will ensure that you will meet this quality criteria and the tactics that you're going to use to get there. So for shared purpose, again, as I mentioned at the start, it's often more meaningful to engage patients from the start of a project, but I would encourage you to not let that be a barrier if it's not possible in your own case. But the idea at shared purpose is really, helping facilitate discussions between everyone and making sure that everyone understands roles and responsibilities and what you're setting out to achieve, essentially. Next slide. In terms of respect and accessibility, this is making sure that a safe space is created for everyone so people feel comfortable, no matter what their expertise or experiences are, to share. And it really is an openness to an inclusion of people to be able to contribute to the project. So helping also decrease some of those barriers for people to be able to participate. So sorry, Linnea, I've been kicked out again, but I'm assuming you're on representativeness of stakeholders?
Yep, keep going.
Okay, thanks. So this refers to, if you're working, for example, with a pediatric population, that you hopefully can include some children, or at the very least, some of their parents, to provide some perspectives. And the next slide is roles and responsibilities. So again, this is making sure that everyone is clear on what to expect in terms of being part of the project. So in this case, there might be a terms of reference, so everyone knows how they would contribute. And I would argue that you might have some predefined ways that you think patient partners might be contributing to your project, but I'd encourage almost like a negotiation. You might have what you think your patient partners will be contributing, but I'd encourage you to also ask them and make sure that they're comfortable with that, or they might have other ideas too. In terms of capacity and capability for engagement, that is making sure that you've got the time and you've got the support to be able to engage patient partners with your project. Probably will also need at least a bit of a budget to do this. You may or may not be able to provide your patient partners with honoraria, but there will be a bit of a need to, maybe help offset some of their costs, maybe in-person meetings when the time comes that we can do that sort of thing again. The next one is transparency and communication and documentation. So that's making sure that you have a plan for how you're going to communicate with your team. I find that research teams will often get really busy and forget that they've engaged patient partners. And so even when they're doing something in which patient partners may not be involved, keeping them up to date that the research is still happening and letting them know about what is happening, even if they're not contributing to it, is really important. Finding ways to communicate with your patient partners that are meaningful for them is also important. So you might do Zoom, you might do phone calls, there might be emails, but you should ask your partners about what works best for them. And the last of the quality criteria is continuity and sustainability. So, it's always nice if you can build relationships in one project and continue them in other projects. It's not always the case though, and so I think just being honest with your patient partners about if you're able to continue having them as part of your research projects and your research team, that is important to have that discussion. The next slide is about finding patient partners, and these are just some ways that, if you're not sure how you might find patient partners, some places you can go to. So lots of health charities and patient organizations, have patient partners who are interested in being parts of research teams. Lots of patient partners are on social media, and, I'd say use this one with caution. You can find all kinds of interesting folks on social media. Many research networks already include patients as partners, so some of the CIHR SPORE chronic disease networks I know some of you are on the call today, and you're always eager to participate in other teams and other research projects too. So I'm going to put that plug out there. And speaking of plugs, the last one is for CTO's College of Lived Experience. I mentioned this earlier in the call that we've created this group of, it's about 25 people from across Ontario. They vary in age, they vary in where they live, rural, urban, different kinds of settings. They've had different, some of them different conditions, or their spouses or family members have, and they all are interested in clinical trials and research. And so this is a group that we do work with our own projects, but we are also willing to bring projects to this group that you may want patient partners to be involved in, or if you just want to dip your toes in the water of patient engagement, it might be as simple as setting up a Zoom project, or sorry, a Zoom call, where you could talk to the college about your research and just take questions from them and get ideas from them in terms of their thoughts on your project, or potentially how patient partners might be engaged. So lastly, I just wanted to quickly speak about working remotely. And so, you know, COVID-19 has brought us this era where we're working virtually. And, you know, I know some people aren't sure about doing that with patient partners. I can tell you it is feasible. And for some patient partners, that may actually make working with you less of a burden than it otherwise could be. So things I want you to think about for patients and caregivers, consider that to be part of their team, they might need to have to take time off work to participate. And so in the era we're living in now, taking an hour for a quick call or a half hour for a quick call might be easier for them than coming to your office or needing to travel to see you. They may be caring for someone, and they may be limited by their condition, by accessibility issues, etc. So don't think that the only way to engage patient partners is through seeing them face to face. I would also offer up that you should ask patient partners how they would like to connect. Some people don't mind Zoom, some people would rather a one-on-one conversation. I'd encourage you to do so at times that are convenient for them. I know you're usually working Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, but sometimes being able to accommodate people with different times is really appreciated. And one thing that I've been doing in some of the projects I've been involved with lately is considering hosting meetings with your patient partners as part of the overall team, but also separately as a patient partner group. So although the idea is to create a comfortable space for everyone to interact and chat with each other, sometimes patient partners will just feel more comfortable having some one-on-one time and getting to know each other as well, quite frankly. So I'm going to ask Linnea to bring the poll back up, even though unfortunately I can't see it. But I'd ask you to go back to the task that I gave you at the start of the session, where you were to think about a project that you are working on right now and how you might include patient partners in that, and ask you the same two questions we asked at the start, and ask you if A, you feel like this is a task you could now take on, and B, if you feel like you have a better grasp of where you might go for resources to help you out there. And maybe Linnea, you can let me know what you're finding out there. I'm going to try and join again to see if we can do this.
It's looking good. There's a lot more yeses and no no's so far.
Okay, awesome.
We've got 81% yes for the first question and 19% maybe, so that's gone up. And then for the second question, okay. 94% is yes and 6% maybe. Thank you, guys. Okay, that's awesome. So I know I've left very little time for questions, but I'm happy to take some questions in the time that we have remaining. And also happy to take questions in the chat box too. And I've also left you with my information here so that you can contact me if you'd like. So if anyone has questions, you can either type it into the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and just identify who's speaking and ask us your question. So Dawn, I'll start. I had a question around, you talked a lot about the money commitment, which is great. And I hadn't even thought about that particular part, but what about the time commitment to create these meaningful teams that feel comfortable with each other and sharing, and then doing that remotely? What can you expect in terms of a time commitment as someone who's leading that group?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, it's going to take more time, right? Like, I'm not going to lie about that. It is going to take more time because I think that patient partners are a little bit less used to just jumping in and like away we go. And I think part of that is respecting some of the vulnerability that they bring to the team. So I think, for example, when you do bring patient partners on, if you don't already know them, taking some time out before you bring them onto the team to just get to know them as individuals and to also share a bit about yourself, to talk about the potential research project that you'll be working on. And then, I always try to make myself as available as possible for patient partners. So to encourage them after we've had team meetings to follow up with me, to ask any questions. I'm happy to jump on a quick call, happy to answer anything via email. And, generally once you get going, there's not a huge outside time commitment besides what you're up to. But I think just making yourself as available as possible. I think most people are really respectful that, you are busy, but opening the door that you're willing to have a few minutes conversation. It doesn't have to be an hour-long meeting every time, but answering questions and helping them feel comfortable, I think, is important.
That's great. Thank you. Can you see the question here in the chat, or do you want me to read
it? Yeah, I can see it. So thanks for the question. The question is, do you think one patient partner for your study is sufficient, or do you think a couple of patient partners would be more beneficial? I always like to encourage people to involve more than one patient partner. There's a couple reasons for that. The first is that it's difficult for one patient partner to represent multiple perspectives. They are inevitably going to be representing their own experiences. But I know that some have more ties with their own communities and can bring some of those perspectives to you as well. But I think you take a lot of pressure off your patient partners if you have a couple of them at least on your team. People who are living with conditions often have their life get in the way of your well-intended research project. And so I think also that makes them feel a lot better about, if I can't make a meeting, there's still going to be a patient perspective and place at the table. And so it takes a lot of pressure off of them. It also increases the diversity, quite honestly, just by adding a voice or two to the project.
That's great. Any other questions? We have one more minute. Sorry for the lost time. I guess I would like to ask one more question, Dawn. Something that I heard someone else say when they were speaking about patient partners was, it kind of was decreasing people's anxiety about not doing it well and not doing it right because it might be new to some people. What would you say to that to kind of make someone feel good about starting something new that they might not do perfectly the first time in this space? What would be sort of your closing remark and your encouragement as they look into doing this?
So I think that's a great question, Linnea, and people always get worried that, oh my God, like I didn't go to school for this, I don't know how to do this, I don't have a recipe for this. And I'm going to tell you that is 100% okay. In most cases, this is completely new for your patient partners as well. So I think, saying upfront, like, we're new to this, but we're completely open to your thoughts and ideas about it. If there's something that's just not working for you, let us know and let's talk about how we can make it work better for you, and chances are for the whole team. So I think that's kind of part of the beauty of bringing in a patient partner from the start of something, is that you, again, level the playing field about that we're all new to this. We're going to build something from scratch together that will work for everyone. So I'd say, you know, don't use that as an excuse to not do it. I think there's so many rewards to doing it, and to just being really open about the fact that you are new to this. There will probably be some stumbles, but just being really open and honest about that, and being really receptive to feedback from your patient partners. And I think that's super helpful.
That's great. Thank you, Dawn. Well, I'm seeing that we are out of time, so I wanted to thank you all for being here. Thank you again, Dawn, for sharing all of this experience with us and some really practical